Abandoned by her people, the alien widow found hope in a human's hands. The crimson dust of planet Xerion swirled in endless spirals across the desolate wasteland. 2 dying stars cast their fading light over the ruins of what once was a thriving civilization. Among the twisted metal and crumbling stone structures, a lone figure crawled through the debris, her body weak from hunger and desperation. Her name was Zara Velith, once a respected member of the Xerion High Council, wife to General Koran Velith, who had died defending their world against human invaders 3 cycles ago. Now she was nothing more than a ghost, abandoned by her own people, who blamed her for bringing the curse of widowhood upon their community. The Xerion culture was harsh and unforgiving. They believed that death followed those who carried grief, and Zara had become a living symbol of loss and defeat. After her husband's death, the council had stripped her of her rank, her home, and her dignity. They had cast her out into the wasteland to die alone, believing this would cleanse their society of the bad fortune she represented. For weeks, Zara had wandered through the ruins, surviving on scraps and rainwater collected in broken containers. Her once beautiful silver skin had turned pale and rough, her elegant robes now torn and dirty. She had not spoken to another living being in so long that she had almost forgotten the sound of her own voice. On this particular day, as the twin suns reached their peak, Zara collapsed behind a fallen pillar. Her strength was completely gone, and she prepared to accept her fate. The silence around her was complete, broken only by the whisper of wind through the ruins. Then she heard something that made her heart skip. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and getting closer. Fear shot through her weak body. Had her people come back to finish what they started? Or worse, were there scavengers in the ruins who would take advantage of her helpless state? She pressed herself against the cold stone and held her breath. The footsteps stopped nearby, and she heard the sound of someone setting down a pack. Carefully, she peered around the edge of the pillar. What she saw shocked her to her core. A human soldier sat against a broken wall, his armor scratched and dented, his face tired but kind. He was alone, apparently resting during his journey through the wasteland. She had heard stories about humans during the war, how they were violent and dangerous, but this one looked more exhausted than threatening. The soldier, whose name was Commander Jake Morrison, had been separated from his unit during a reconnaissance mission. He had been wandering the ruins for days, trying to find his way back to the human base. His supplies were running low, but he still had some emergency rations in his pack dot. As he sat there, Jake noticed movement behind the pillar. His training kicked in, and he slowly reached for his weapon, but something made him stop. The movement was too weak, too desperate to be a threat. Instead of drawing his gun, he did something that surprised even himself. He pulled out one of his last meal packets and placed it on the ground between himself and the pillar. Then he stood up, stepped back, and waited. He had no idea who or what was hiding there, but something in his gut told him that whoever it was needed helped more than he needed at meal. Zara watched in amazement as the human placed food on the ground and backed away. This made no sense to her. Humans were supposed to be cruel and selfish, at least according to everything she had been taught. Yet here was one offering his own food to a stranger he had never even seen. Her hunger was stronger than her fear. After watching him for several minutes to make sure it was not a trap, she slowly crawled out from behind the pillar. Her movements were clumsy and weak, but she managed to reach the food packet. Her hands shook as she opened it, revealing more food than she had seen in weeks. Jake watched the alien woman emerge from hiding, and his heart went out to her. She was clearly starving and desperate, her clothes torn and her body thin from malnutrition. Whatever had happened to her, she was no threat to anyone in her current condition. As Zara ate, she kept glancing at the human soldier. He made no move to approach her or take back his gift. He simply sat there, giving her space to eat in peace. For the first time in months, she felt something other than despair. She felt hope. The next morning brought a harsh sandstorm that forced both Zara and Jake to take shelter in the same ruined building. The howling wind and stinging sand made it impossible to travel, so they found themselves sharing the same small space, eyeing each other warily, but no longer with outright hostility. Jake had spent the night thinking about the alien woman. Her people were technically his enemies, but she was clearly no soldier. She was just a survivor, like him, trying to make it through another day in this harsh wasteland. His military training told him to be cautious, but his human compassion told him something different. Zara, meanwhile, had been struggling with her own conflicted feelings. Everything she had been taught about humans painted them as heartless conquerors, yet this one had shown her more kindness than her own people had in months. She found herself curious about him, wondering what had brought him to this desolate place. As the storm raged outside, Jake decided to break the silence. "I'm Jake," he said simply, pointing to himself. "Jake Morrison." Zara looked at him for a long moment before responding. "Zara," she said quietly. "Zara Velith." It was a small beginning, but it was a beginning nonetheless. Over the next few hours, they slowly began to communicate. Jake's universal translator helped bridge the language gap, and they discovered they had more in common than either had expected. Both had lost people they cared about in the war. Both had been abandoned by their own kind, though for different reasons. Jake had been listed as missing in action and presumed dead, while Zara had been cast out for bringing shame to her people. They were both alone in a hostile world, with nothing but their will to survive. As the storm began to subside, they heard new sounds outside. Voices speaking in the harsh tones of Zerian raiders. Zara's blood ran cold. She recognized the dialect immediately. These were not her people from the city, but the savage outcasts who lived in the deep desert, surviving by stealing from travelers and the weak. Jake saw the fear in her eyes and understood immediately. Without a word, he moved to the window and peered out carefully. He counted at least 6 armed figures moving through the ruins, searching for shelter or victims. Their weapons were crude but effective, and they moved with the confidence of those who had survived in this wasteland for years. "We need to move," Jake whispered. "Can you walk?" Zara nodded, though she was still weak. Jake helped her to her feet, and together they moved toward the back of the building. But they were too late. The raiders had already surrounded their shelter. The leader of the raider group, a scarred warrior named Thane, called out in the Zerion language, "We know you're in there. Come out and we might let you die quickly." Jake looked at Zara. "What did he say?" "They want us to surrender," she whispered back. "They'll kill us either way." Jake checked his weapon. He had enough ammunition for a short fight, but not enough to take on 6 armed raiders. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. "Can you create a distraction?" he asked Zara. She looked at him with surprise. "You trust me?" "We're in this together now," he replied. "Do you trust me?" For a moment, Zara hesitated. Then she nodded. "What do you need me to do?" Jake quickly explained his plan. It was risky, but it was their only chance. Zara would call out to the raiders in their own language, pretending to be alone and injured. When they came closer to investigate, Jake would have the element of surprise. Taking a deep breath, Zara called out in Zerian, "Help me! I'm hurt and alone." The raiders took the bait. They approached the building cautiously, but with confidence, expecting to find an easy victim. When the first one stepped through the doorway, Jake was ready. The fight was brief but intense. Jake's military training and superior weapons gave him the advantage, but the raiders were tough and desperate. In the end, it was Zara who turned the tide of battle. When one of the raiders was about to strike Jake from behind, She threw a piece of broken stone with surprising accuracy, giving Jake the opening he needed to finish the fight. When the dust settled, the raiders were defeated, and Jake and Zara stood together, breathing heavily but alive. They looked at each other with new respect and understanding. "Thank you," Jake said. "Thank you," Zara replied. They both knew that something had changed between them. They were no longer just strangers sharing shelter. They were allies, partners in survival, and perhaps something more. 3 days after the raider attack, Jake and Zara had developed a routine of survival that neither had expected. They traveled together during the cooler hours of dawn and dusk, sharing the burden of carrying supplies and watching for threats. Jake's military training proved invaluable for navigation and security, while Zara's knowledge of the local terrain and her people's customs helped them avoid dangerous areas and find hidden water sources. The unlikely partnership was working, but both were still guarded about their pasts. Jake had not spoken about his mission or his unit, while Zara had revealed little about why she had been cast out by her people. The trust between them was growing, but it was still fragile, built on shared necessity rather than true understanding. On the 4th day, they encountered something that would change everything. Hidden in a canyon was a crashed human transport ship, its hull torn open and its cargo scattered across the rocky ground. Jake approached it carefully, his heart sinking as he recognized the markings of his own unit. "This is my team's supply ship," he said quietly. "They were supposed to meet me at the rendezvous point." Zara watched as Jake searched through the wreckage, looking for any sign of survivors or clues about what had happened. She could see the pain in his eyes as he found personal items belonging to his fellow soldiers, but no sign of life. Among the debris, Jake found a damaged communication device. With some work, he managed to get it partially functional. Static filled the air, but through the noise, they could hear fragments of radio transmissions. Human voices, speaking in code about evacuation procedures and emergency protocols. "They're still alive," Jake said with relief. "My unit is still out there." But the radio also brought troubling news. The human forces were preparing to withdraw from this sector, having achieved their military objectives. If Jake didn't reach the evacuation point within the next few days, he would be left behind. Zara saw the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to rejoin his people, but he also felt responsible for her safety. She made the decision for both of them. "You have to go," she said firmly. "Your people need you." "What about you?" Jake asked. "You can't survive out here alone." "I survived before I met you," Zara replied, though they both knew she had been close to death when they first encountered each other. Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking hard. Then he made a decision that surprised them both. "Come with me," he said. "Come to the evacuation point." Zara stared at him in shock. "Your people would never accept me. I'm their enemy." "You're my ally," Jake said simply. "And I'm not leaving you behind." The idea was crazy, dangerous, and probably impossible. But as they discussed it, they realized it might be their only chance. The human evacuation ships would have medical facilities where Zara could recover her strength. And Jake's testimony about her help during the raider attack might be enough to convince his commanders to grant her safe passage. They decided to risk it. Using the damaged radio, Jake managed to contact his unit and request permission to bring a non-combatant alien to the evacuation point. The response was skeptical, but not entirely negative. His commanding officer, Colonel Martinez, agreed to evaluate the situation when they arrived. The journey to the evacuation point would take them through the most dangerous part of the wasteland, where both human and Azerion patrols were known. To operate, they would have to move carefully, avoiding detection while racing against time as they prepared to leave the crash site. Jake found something in the wreckage that made him smile. A small medical kit, still intact. He immediately began treating some of Zara's minor injuries, cleaning wounds and applying antiseptic with gentle care. "You don't have to do this," Zara said as he worked. "Yes, I do," Jake replied. "We're partners now. Partners take care of each other." As they set out on the most dangerous leg of their journey, both felt a mixture of hope and fear. They were no longer just two lost souls trying to survive. They had become something neither had expected: a team, united not by species or nationality, but by trust and mutual respect. The twin suns of Zirion began to set as they made their way across the wasteland, two figures walking side by side toward an uncertain future. Behind them lay the ruins of their old lives. Ahead lay the possibility of something new and unexpected. The evacuation point was located in a valley 3 days' march from the crash site, but Jake and Zara's journey was far from straightforward. They had to navigate through territory controlled by both human and Zirion forces, avoiding patrols from both sides who would shoot first and ask questions later. On the second day of their journey, they encountered their first major obstacle. A human patrol drone spotted them from a distance, its sensors immediately identifying Jake's military transponder. The drone circled them warily, its weapon systems powered up and ready to fire. Jake raised his hand slowly, showing his identification tags. "This is Commander Jake Morrison, requesting safe passage to evacuation point Delta 7. He called out to the drone's communication system. The response came through the drone's speakers in a cold, mechanical voice. "Commander Morrison, you are accompanied by an unidentified Zarian individual. Please explain." Jake looked at Zara, who was standing perfectly still, her hands visible and empty. He knew that his next words could determine whether they both lived or died. "The Zarian individual is a non-combatant refugee who provided assistance during enemy contact," he said formally. "I am escorting her to safety as per humanitarian protocols." There was a long pause as the drone's AI processed this information and communicated with human command. Finally, the weapons powered down. "Proceed to evacuation point Delta 7. You will be met by security personnel for debriefing." As the drone flew away, Zara looked at Jake with new understanding. "You risked your career for me," she said quietly. "I told the truth," Jake replied. "You did save my life." But they both knew it was more than that. Jake had chosen to trust her completely, even when it meant risking his own standing with his military superiors. It was a gesture that touched Zara deeply, reminding her that not all loyalty was based on species or nationality. Their second major challenge came from an unexpected source. As they approached the final ridge before the evacuation point, they were confronted by a group of Zarian soldiers led by someone Zara recognized with shock and horror. "Commander Vex," she whispered, instinctively stepping behind Jake. Commander Vex was a war hero among the Zarian people, known for his ruthless tactics against human forces. He was also someone who had personally condemned Zara's exile, claiming that her grief had made her weak and dangerous to their society. "The cursed widow," Vex said in accented English, his weapons trained on both of them. "Still alive, I see, and consorting with the enemy." Jake moved protectively in front of Zara, his hand on his weapon. "She's under my protection," he said firmly. Vex laughed coldly. "Protection from a human? You have fallen even further then. I thought Zara Velith." "She's not your concern anymore," Jake said. "Your people cast her out, remember? She's not your citizen to command." "She is still Zarian," Vex replied. "And she knows too much about our defenses to be allowed to reach your evacuation ships." The standoff was tense and dangerous. Jake was outnumbered, but he had better weapons and training. Zara stood between them, the living symbol of everything. That had gone wrong between their two species. Then Zara did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She stepped forward, placing herself between Jake and Vex. Enough, she said in Zarian, her voice carrying the authority she had once possessed as a council member. I am no longer bound by your laws or your fears. One choose my own path now. Vex's eyes narrowed. And what path is that, widow? The path of those who build instead of destroy, Zara replied, switching to English so Jake could understand. The path of those who choose hope over hatred. Commander Vex studied her for a long moment, then looked at Jake. You would really risk everything for her? Yes, Jake said without hesitation. Something in Jake's simple, honest answer seemed to affect Vex. His weapon lowered slightly, and he looked at Zara with something that might have been respect. Perhaps, he said slowly, there is wisdom in choosing one's own path. With that cryptic statement, Vex gestured to his soldiers, and they withdrew into the rocks, leaving Jake and Zara alone on the ridge. What just happened? Jake asked. Think, Zara said thoughtfully, that sometimes even warriors can recognize courage when they see it. As they crested the final ridge, the human evacuation point spread out below them. Ships, soldiers, and the promise of safety waited in the valley. But both Jake and Zara knew that their real journey was just beginning. The human evacuation point was a bustling hub of activity as Jake and Zara approached the perimeter. Soldiers were loading equipment onto transport ships, while medical personnel tended to wounded personnel. The sight of so many humans working, together with military precision, was both impressive and intimidating to Zara. Colonel Martinez met them at the security checkpoint, her expression skeptical but not hostile. She was a veteran officer who had seen enough of war to recognize that survival sometimes required unconventional alliances. Commander Morrison, she said formally, I understand you have an unusual request. Yes, ma'am, Jake replied. This is Zara Velith. She saved my life during hostile contact and provided crucial assistance during my return to friendly lines. Colonel Martinez studied Zara carefully. She's Zerion military? Former council member, Zara said in careful English. Cast out by my people, no longer part of their society. And you want safe passage to human space? The colonel asked. I want a chance to start over, Zara replied honestly. Away from the hatred and fear that destroyed my world. Colonel Martinez was quiet for a long moment, weighing the political and military implications. Finally, she made her decision. Commander Morrison, you're vouching for her character? With my life, ma'am, Jake said firmly. Very well. She can travel with us as a refugee under humanitarian protection, but she'll be monitored closely until we can determine her final status. The medical examination that followed was thorough but respectful. Human doctors worked to treat Zara's malnutrition and injuries, while also learning about Zarian physiology. They were professional and kind, treating her not as an enemy, but as a patient who needed care. As the evacuation ships prepared to depart, Jake and Zara found themselves on the observation deck of the main transport, watching the red desert of Zarian fall away below them. They had both left their old lives behind, but they faced the future together. Are you afraid? Jake asked as they watched the stars appear in the viewports. Yes, Zara admitted, but also excited. For the first time in so long, I feel like I have a future. What do you want to do with that future? Jake asked. Zara thought carefully before answering. I want to help prevent others from going through what we went through. Maybe work with refugees, or help negotiate peace between our peoples. Jake nodded. That sounds like a good use of your experience. And you? Zara asked. What will you do when this war is over? Jake smiled. I think I'd like to learn more about other cultures, maybe work in diplomatic relations, help people understand each other better. As the ship jumped into hyperspace, carrying them toward human space and new possibilities, both Jake and Zara felt a sense of completion. They had found each other in the wasteland, two broken souls who had discovered that trust and compassion could bridge any gap. The journey to Jake's home planet took several days, during which they spent time learning about each other's cultures and discussing their hopes for the future. Other passengers gradually accepted Zara's presence, especially after hearing Jake's account of her bravery and loyalty. When they finally arrived at the human colony world of New Geneva, they were met by representatives from both the military and civilian government. Zara's case was unique, and it took time to process her request for asylum. But Jake's testimony, combined with her obvious desire to contribute positively to society, eventually won her approval for permanent residence. 6 months later, Jake and Zara stood together at the opening ceremony of the first Interspecies Understanding Center on New Geneva. Jake had left the military to work as a cultural liaison, while Zara had become an advocate for refugees and displaced persons from both species. "Do you ever regret it?" Zara asked as they watched humans and Zarian representatives working together on peaceful projects. "Which part?" Jake replied with a smile, choosing to trust a stranger in the wasteland. Jake looked at her with warmth and affection. "Never. That stranger became my partner, my friend, and eventually something much more important." As the ceremony concluded with speeches about hope and cooperation, Jake and Zara walked together into their new life. They had proven that even in the darkest circumstances, individuals could choose compassion over hatred, understanding over fear, and love over indifference. Their story became a symbol of hope for both species, showing that peace was possible when people chose to see beyond their differences and recognize their shared humanity. In the end, they had not just survived the wasteland, they had transformed it into the foundation of a better future. The stars that had once seemed cold and distant now felt like beacons of possibility, lighting the way toward a universe where understanding and cooperation could triumph over war and hatred.